The East African community has achieved full economic integration, at least on paper. And this includes a customs union, a common market. The six-nation bloc is, however, currently being beset by a lack of a common response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
The adoption of a COVID-19 testing requirement for all truckers entering Uganda from Kenya 2 weeks ago sparked a strike, which has led to acute fuel shortage in Uganda. It has rattled supply chain and cost businesses millions in losses. Uganda is a tunnel through which cargo to Rwanda, Burundi and South Sudan is trucked from the East African coast. Each member of the bloc has adopted unique pandemic regulations. While Tanzania, Burundi and South Sudan have been less strict, Uganda and Rwanda's rules have been seen as punitive for trade. According to the Shippers Council for Eastern Africa, pandemic measures have more than doubled the number of days it takes to transport goods as well as the cost. A trade and investment report for the bloc for 2020 said Eastern African coast member state lost over $3 billion worth of trade due to COVID-19.
Well, for more on this story, we're now joined by Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who's a scholar of international relations, specialising in security issues in the Horn of Africa region. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
So how is it that the East African community can get so many things right in terms of the common market and a lot of the political issues, but something as dangerous as COVID-19, they've not been able to agree on protocols?
Yes, we've had very differential policy making across the East African countries that has made it difficult for all the countries in the East African region cooperating under the East African community to actually come together and have unified protocols. And this has affected trade very negatively. It has affected movement of people and workers in the region very negatively. But this is not a surprise. We've seen similar kind of ways in which many countries, many regional blocs, including continental blocs, have actually failed to cohere their protocols where COVID is concerned. It has affected Europe, it has affected Asia, Middle East, the United States of America. And all this is as a result of countries having to move very fast to protect their populations against more infections. So it is very much expected and it is unfortunate.
30th of April 2020, the East African community issued a response plan to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I suppose at that stage it seemed as if things were going to be a bit more manageable than it turned out. Did countries panic and then they just said, you know what, actually we're going to protect our country first and then we'll talk about the plan later?
I think countries panic, particularly when the recent wave, which has been caused by the Omicron strain of the COVID-19 virus, and many countries panicked by the sheer speed of the spread of Omicron virus, and therefore countries have always gone back to protect their markets, their citizens by closing their borders. And it is, globalization has been on the retreat, where nationalism has been on the rise, and COVID pandemic has really underlined this kind of retreat of globalization or regionalization and the rise of nationalism. And we're seeing this played out within the East African community.
Where are we now? Because at one point, trucks could not cross borders. Trade literally came to a halt on some borders.
I think that has eased a little. There's some movement, but not fully. And again, it's not the first time that we are seeing these kind of challenges between Kenya and Uganda. We've had serious challenges between Kenya and Tanzania, actually more even than Uganda, which brought about very many challenges and stoppage of trucks, passenger buses, and movement across the Kenya-Tanzania border, and of course now the Kenya-Uganda border. We expect that this is going to ease as the Omicron infection spread eases pretty fast in Eastern African region.
So what do these leaders talk about when they gather? And they were meeting recently talking about admitting DRC. And yet they've got a crisis that really needs to be dealt with, especially if they need to recharge their economies.
Yeah, I think the leaders have very good intentions, and they really want to secure and expand the trading blocks in the Eastern and now Central Africa. However, policy-wise, and this is where the practitioners in international relations, foreign policy, diplomacy, health come in to try and come up with very specific policies for which then the heads of states, who are the ones that are responsible for the East African community, pass. There is that gap between policy making and practice. It has always been there. It's not something new. It's been there with the very different trade regimes, policies, the customs union that have been there. At what level is the custom union? Others want to have more protective measures. Countries like Tanzania wants to have to protect their industrial base. And so these issues have always been there. And I suspect even beyond COVID, these issues are still going to be there. It's just that COVID-19 has really put a stress on movement and trading and economies in the region.
I've often wondered about some of these memberships that overlap, COMESA, EAC, SACU, and all of that. Does that feed into trying to come up with protocols that certain areas can work with?
Yes, they do, and it also depends on the whims of who is the president at what time and where that head of state, moves more to. So the overlapping nature of membership, for example, Tanzania belonging to COMESA, to East African Community, and SADC, DR Congo belonging to the Central Africa bloc, and at the same time now coming to the more lucrative East African community bloc. There is that tension that is always there, and in the East African community, Kenya and Tanzania have always had very troublesome competition, sometimes almost bordering on the negative because of the overlapping membership on the blocks, East African Community and SADC and COMESA.
What do you think the lessons learned might be? I get a sense that a lot of these groupings, like the East African Community, they discuss everything except the things that happen rarely, like pandemics, like health crises. They talk about trade and, restrictions in terms of tariffs and so on and so forth. Is this a lesson for us that we need to prepare for these responses much better in the future as a grouping, as opposed to just focusing on a country response?
Oh yeah, big time. It's a lesson for both the policymakers, leaders in the various economic blocs, and not just the East African Economic Cooperation, also SADC, COMESA, ECOWAS, and others who on most occasions go to these meetings, come up with policies that are under-researched, undercooked, underthinked, or under thought. Not so much thought has gone into the processes of coming up with sound, practical policies. And we must say this, that our leaders sometimes just go to these meetings without really knowing the impact of what they are passing, or the content for which kind of policies that they are passing. And if we are to compare with the kind of policies that we see other blocs do pass in Europe, in Asia and others, they are well thought out. They have gotten the scholars, experts to look at them thoroughly. So when they are being adopted in the various economic blocks, they are going to help in the economic development and well-being of the citizens that belong to those countries that form those economic blocks. So this is a lesson for those leaders that just attend meetings and come and just pose for cameras in order to make their citizens happy that things are moving, yet the kind of policies that are being discussed, passed and adopted, on most parts sometimes useless to those countries. And those leaders don't mean anything to carry on with those policies that they are actually adopting.
All right, we've got a couple of minutes left, and I'd like us to touch on Burkina Faso if we can. And it's looking very concerning when you start seeing protests on the streets for over issues like peace and jihadist insurgencies. Are you worried that we could see another Guinea-Mali situation playing out?
I'm very concerned, and what we are seeing in Burkina Faso today, and the situation is still unfolding, is testimony that counter-terrorism policies in that country and the larger West Africa has failed. The counter-terrorism policies that have been employed and the deployment of hard power to root out Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda in West Africa, in the Sahel, and in the Maghreb have failed. And this calls for very sober discussions about the nature of strategies that are being used in that part of the world. For starters, the French, who are really leading in trying to address extremism and terrorism in the Sahel and the Francophone countries in West Africa. We don't see those policies as working. It's becoming so much acrimonious. There's such an acrimonious relationship between the Francophone countries in West Africa and France in fighting terrorism. And the second point here is, this is important, is when you look at the pictures of those children, women, young people in Burkina Faso, and also Mali and Niger, you are looking at emaciated, very troublesome population there that is in poverty, and terrorism thrives in poverty situations. So if development is not going to be assured, if the populations are not going to be taken care of in the ways that they should, then the terrorists, the extremist groups are going to recruit those young people, those young men and women into their ranks and file. And therefore, the strategy has to change there. We can see already even the military in Burkina Faso is not happy with the way terrorism is being fought, insecurity is being fought, the policies that politicians put in place. They don't even care about the conditions of the security personnel in Burkina Faso. They are bound to cause this kind of disturbances. And the people who are going to celebrate is Al-Qaeda, is Boko Haram, is Ansar Din, is Al-Murabitun, and the other crazy, violent terrorist groups that are roaming the deserts of Sahel. This has got to stop, and we've got to change the strategy of fighting terrorism, not just in the Sahel, but the entire Africa.
Dr. Ali, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.